My name is Mary Ellis. I'm chairwoman of FarmtechSociety, and I'm delighted to be here and talk about one of my favorite subjects, sustainability, and have such an awesome panel of people here. I'm just going to go through the panel and get them to quickly introduce yourself, if you would, and say a few words about your company.
Hi, my name is Annie Wissemeier. I'm a part of InfiteAcres, InfiteAcres, and I am their sustainability engineer, so focused on looking at our carbon footprint and reducing our greenhouse gas emissions.
My name is Bongartz. I'm the general manager of FLUENCE, which is a horticultural lighting company, and I'm very happy to be here and talk about such an important topic, sustainability.
Hi, I'm Jack Farmer. I'm one of the co-founders and the chief scientific officer of a company called LetUSgrow. We're an aeroponic irrigation supplier to vertical farms and glasshouses.
Hi, I'm Carrol Plummer. I'm a co-founder and CEO of a company called Vivent. We measure plant signaling networks and provide information to growers and researchers so they can grow more sustainably.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to start with you, Annie. What is sustainability? What does it mean to indoor growers? And are we talking about a buzzword here, just it's full of greenwashing? Or is this a real thing in your company?
Absolutely, it's a real thing, and I think my presence as a sustainability engineer in our company really shows that. We feel that we can grow food in a healthier way, and we can do that by control. So we control our inputs, our fertilizer, our lighting, our water, and our other inputs. And we're able to give our plants exactly what they need and minimize that waste. We're also able to work on our energy efficiency. So we do consume a lot of energy. However, we prioritize clean and renewable energy. We know that's important to our business. And we are also constantly improving and utilizing our technical expertise to increase that efficiency. And the other big thing is because we grow in a different way, we're able to change the traditional food, the produce supply chain in America. So most leafy greens come from California and Arizona. So if you live in Ohio like myself, that lettuce has to be harvested from the field, taken to a packer where it's often triple washed, and then it enters the traditional supply chain going through 1, 2, or more distribution centers, often in a cold supply chain, where it then arrives at your retailer. 80 acres, we do all those steps under one roof, so we're able to grow, harvest, package, and distribute from one building footprint to about a 150-mile radius. So when you look at that, we're really able to drive real change, and because of that, reduce the food waste. So each of those steps have inherent food loss. So in America, that's up to 40% food loss from field to retailer. So we're really able to condense that supply chain and minimize that loss. That being said, greenwashing is a concern for the industry. And we really feel that having data available to inform our claims and improve our processes is critical.
That's amazing. And Timo, what are LED suppliers or lighting companies doing to help with sustainability in the industry?
Yeah, first of all, we are just a little tiny piece of, by supplying LED or technology. Of course, we need to see sustainability much more holistic, as Annie was alluding to. But when talking about LED, as we all know, it's a more efficient light source compared to traditional. That is a good thing. What are we doing is we do photobiology research to see with different spectra, which have different efficiency, how much biomass we can produce. And then finding the sweet spot between creating the most biomass with the less possible energy usage. So that is for us extremely important. But also we spoke about that before the panel, looking about different technologies or ways to deploy lighting, for example, to use UV lighting to suppress mold, or to use special lighting technologies to avoid growth regulators and stuff like that. So I think a lot of research can be done in this field.
And Jack, your company uses aeroponics, right?
Correct,
so
yeah.
How does that influence sustainability in indoor farming, or does it?
Yeah, so I would say it does. I think firstly that the holistic approach you explained at the start there is absolutely, I guess, the main impact of our industry. Like it changes supply chains, and that's what we do, I guess, as technology providers, is help make that more effective. So I would look at aeroponics in the same way as you'd look at a lighting supplier. We can take that irrigation system, we can help keep the plants healthier, help them grow faster, and actually that influences energy as well. So every day you're not growing is energy saved. So the kilowatt hours per kilogram can go down due to an accelerated growth rate on a happier plant. So I'd say that yield and acceleration piece actually is part of our effect. But the other bit that I'm really passionate about and that's really important is water efficiency as well. Now, the key thing to understand about aeroponics, if you haven't been to our stall, you've got an aerosol rather than a huge body of water flowing over those plant roots. So by doing that, we can effectively keep less water in the system at any one time. You've got a more efficient application of water. So by reducing that volume, we reduce water consumption. And by doing it in that way, we keep the matting much drier as well. So you get less evaporative losses off the top of the matting, which works your HVAC less hard. And it's great for greenhouses as well, because that's water going through your roof fence. So water efficiency for me, almost on par with the energy efficiency there.
And are you able to measure that, or how are you measuring those factors?
Well, in terms of the evaporative losses, that's more of an active area of research for us. But we can actively look at substrate. We look at substrate kind of saturation. That's one way we look at that in terms of the kind of the dryness of the crop. But we also just look at the volume of water in the system. And we've got, at the moment, actually, we've got installed Antwerpen, and we've got some trials looking at the different aeroponic deep water culture and ebb and flood systems we're comparing those kind of variables across those as well. So combination of different ways that we're doing it, but it's all and we can always take that learning and tune it up to working with our partners in the field to kind of deploy these systems at scale as well.
And Carrol, can you tell us a little bit about your technology and how it's involved in sustainability?
Sure. So I guess sustainability is at the heart of what we do. We are a certified B Corp, so I think we're trying to build the company around a sustainable impact. And the way we can have an impact is by working with growers who always have a hypothesis about how they can make their operations more sustainable. So increasing yield, using less inputs, whether it's water or energy. And we can work with them so they can test out those hypotheses and see the impact on the plants themselves. I think that we're trying to put plants at the center of the decision making for growers. It's always a complex system. So if you increase the temperature and therefore use more energy, it can cause problems, and it can also increase yields. So it's always a complex system. And what we do is provide that piece of real-time information on how the plants are responding. So I think growers they understand where the big impacts are in their business, and they have hypotheses about how to make improvements. And we can work with them to measure the plants, the crops in real time, and then they have the answers to their questions. They know whether they can turn the temperature down, or they know the benefits of adding more lighting or changing the wavelengths of the lights. So that's the piece that we play in making growing more sustainable.
That is really useful.
So you're kind of a hardware and data management company at the same time, yeah.
Yeah, we need the hardware to pick up the signals from the plants, but nearly all the value we create comes from the analysis. But interestingly, I think the questions that we answer, they come from the growers themselves or people doing plant science research. So that's always the most interesting bit for me, is what are the key questions? How do we make the growing better?
It's such an important topic. And by the way, if there's any questions in the audience, just raise your hand and I'll try and keep my eye out. Annie, how are you using data specifically in your organization for sustainability measures?
So we absolutely believe in the power of data. As I mentioned, I'm an engineer, so we really try and deploy that engineering scientific rigor of measure, improve, monitor. That being said, we really believe in having industry data and benchmarking opportunities. So we are part of the FarmtechSociety, which Mary is as well. And we've been working on an initiative for the industry benchmarking. And this would allow us, through anonymous data submission, to obtain information about key attributes such as sustainability and business metrics. We really believe that this is one way to drive ourselves as a business forward, as well as the whole industry.
Yeah, so I know you and I know quite a lot about the Benchmark Data Initiative, but maybe you could tell us a little bit about the types of data that we're going to be collecting there and how they can be specifically related to the sustainability question.
Absolutely. There would definitely be questions about general business information, but things such as water consumption, input consumptions, waste management. So looking at really what people are doing, how they're doing it, types of technology deployed where we might have some of our industry partners and collaborations be able to help. But really this data in an anonymous format will be really powerful. Looking at this to understand your areas of strengths and your areas of opportunities. Also looking at economic factors, so understanding from a business perspective as well, because sustainability and business really go hand in hand. If I can use a pound less of water, there's a utility bill savings there. So they're really codependent.
And Timo, what resource-efficient technologies are you seeing coming on the market, either in lighting or with some of the companies that you're working with?
Yeah, I prefer actually not to talk about lighting because it's, we're trying to keep it, bigger. But if I see growers all over the world, it's interesting to see at which different aspects they are working to be more sustainable. And I think one of the biggest drivers is the energy part. There is also a big monetary reason why, because we see what energy prices do to businesses, but also being independent from the grid and providing your own energy gives you, more resilient setup of your business and gives you opportunities, of course, to use energy which is not produced through coal or nuclear or whatever. So that has a huge effect, of course, to sustainability. So I think we see more and more growers becoming kind of energy companies as well, to produce their own energy, and that is a big part. But also, I have one example in Sweden, for example, they use wood chips, but they use wood chips which has been used for street construction. But they built a special plant where they could use this wood chips with stones and all the other materials, which would be a waste, to produce energy. And that is huge, because normally that would be a waste. Now we can reuse it. And these are the practices which really are game changers, because you come more to circular economy, more to connected systems, and have less waste. And that is exciting to see that growers think more out of the box, see their particular case, what can they do to have an impact. That's exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, reusing waste streams is such an important part of sustainability. Is anybody else on the panel seeing interesting things done with waste streams?
Yeah, definitely. I think particularly on the irrigation side, there's been a historic utilisation of peat and rock wool, both of which are obviously fantastic to grow in, but have their own environmental impacts. And I think particularly a lot of the innovation that's driving forward now is actually, okay, what's the second life of those materials? Can you utilise a material that's increasingly biodegradable? And that's a lot of the innovation that I'm seeing. So in our systems we have totally biodegradable mats, and we almost design around that because you need that waste stream to go back into industrial composting or similar. Otherwise you're putting a lot of methane into landfill, basically, because as soon as that matting biodegrades in the landfill, if it's not biodegradable, then you're having a huge secondary impact. So I see a lot of innovation there, and I think whilst I'm looking at that mainly from a kind of a fast cycle crop perspective, I think increasingly we'll look to vine crops, tomatoes and similar, and actually maybe that's the question for the late 2020s, 2030s, says, okay, is there a way of actually making these systems more, circular, and reducing the amount of inputs in terms of growing media and still maintaining the same quality of crops that are coming out of it? I think it's a really interesting question for the industry at large, really.
I had one other example to kind of build on that. It's another small Swiss startup company, and they're taking plant waste, so foliage from the greenhouse essentially, and turning that into a replacement for polystyrene that is sometimes used in hydroponic growing or as frames even in aeroponic growing. So there it was, I thought, a lovely example of closing that loop. So planning.
Yeah, we have another member, Renewable, who's here exhibiting as well, and they're taking waste food streams to make a similar kind of compostable growing medium. So I think there is a lot to be done there, and it's really interesting. How can we tie data into all of that? I mean, how important is data when you think about the key aspects of sustainability, and where does that really have its biggest impact? A question for anybody.
I would say it's hugely important. So when you look at your organization, having the data available really allows you to deploy your resources to the things that are going to make the most impact. We really believe in our collaborations with our industry partners, so we work with some of the folks on this stage, and having the data on hand about the technologies, the different stages in the process of growing really allows us to approach improvement with real scientific background to make the most impact long term.
I also think it's like a foundation for, I think there's a tendency and I guess if you're a young company, as we are, there is a tendency to think, okay, maybe I need to overplay my hand a bit and I need to market us as perfect, solving the whole world's problems, when actually, if you're looking to build a long-term partnership with a food retailer, with a grower, it all actually comes down to the numbers. People will want to try your equipment, people will want to know that data. So having the humility and I guess the maturity to get that in advance, have a grown conversation about it, even if it's potentially not as perfect as you would want it to be at that time, allows you to kind of actually move faster. And I think that's increasingly what we're seeing, because at least in vertical farming, the last 5 to 10 years have been a massive hype curve. So I think people have played into that to raise investment, which is totally understandable. But we're maturing as an industry now. We're at least having these mature conversations between commercial partners, and I think that's going to translate into the public discourse as well. And hopefully we'll start to see quite clear metrics as to different facilities' performance, basically from an environmental impact perspective, becoming more public knowledge.
I think also, we need to quantify it. I'm a little bit fearing that we express everything in your carbon footprint, but agriculture in general has a huge issue with a lot of other pesticides, generally chemicals, usage of water. So there are so many different aspects where agriculture is inefficient, and by just driving the conversation to CO2, we miss big problems which we create in other ecosystems. Where's the wastewater, all the waste going in landfills or whatever it is. This has huge impact on our planet, and and saving CO2 does not necessarily mean we have a good impact on the planet, because maybe we have a lot of blind spots we don't see and the consumer does not see, and no one is talking about. Because if we see how much is ending in rivers, polluting our oceans, how much land is not usable anymore because it's dead, that has a huge impact on the planet, which we cannot easily recover. But CO2 became the dominant topic everyone is talking about. That is, for me personally, a huge issue, because there are a lot of other topics, and water is one which is not addressed enough, at least.
I think that's exactly right. I think you manage what you measure, so it's important to be thoughtful about what we are measuring. I think I agree with you. Trying to convert everything into tons of CO2 is kind of interesting, but it really does muddy the waters. It does cause you to make some bad decisions. So I think it's important that we continue to measure and continue to start benchmarking as much as we can, knowing that we've got to improve that. We're not going to do perfect benchmarking of the sustainability of agriculture in the first few tries. It's going to evolve. And we've got to remember that this is a system. We're not, and if we try to convert everything into tons of CO2, we're going to make some ill-informed decisions.
I was going to say the FarmtechSociety, the benchmarking data, I think it addresses some of this. So collecting things beyond just your greenhouse gas inventory, your water use, how do you handle your waste, Do you deploy pesticides where it goes into eutrophication? So I think there are things developing right now to help address some of these concerns and understand this full picture beyond the greenhouse gases of what we're doing and how we can make a difference versus traditional farming means.
Yeah, I think that's just something I wanted to feed in on actually, because this is I think this is a really good conversation almost internal to the industry, but obviously if you focus too much on CO2, it also kind of muddies the waters when comparing us to effectively open field growing. And I often have this conversation with people, well, some of my best friends are organic farmers, and they'll ask me, well, is it better to grow organic or is it better to grow CEA? And generally the conversation I have with them is say, well, look, in a perfect world I would grow like you do, but we live in an imperfect world. And I think recognising that glass house and vertical farming, in many cases it's the least worst option, because it allows you to grow places where you can't grow in that optimal way. And you only really pick that up if you look at the whole system, because as you say, if you can't, if all your lettuce is being shipped from California to Ohio, if you just look at carbon, it's a bit of a reductive measure. You need to look holistically, and it allows us to have the kind of really sensible conversations and actually almost de-emotive conversations with the wider food system, because that's when you can say, okay, CEA is here, a targeted intervention into a local food system that has all these knock-on benefits, and actually in that sense it's the least worst option in that sense.
Yeah, for me, I think generally, when to have the big picture of sustainability, I think to reach this goal, we need to decentralize things. You know, if we have a huge power plant and need to bring the energy everywhere, issue. Same with food. If we produce monocultures, huge fields somewhere and bring it everywhere, issues. We see that this didn't work. Didn't work. We need to correct that. We need to decentralize energy, decentralize food production, and so on. Makes the whole system with that more resilient. And itself, you can easier connect the system, the different elements with each other. Because otherwise you have huge streams going into cities, for example. You cannot recycle that easily in millions, so you will have waste. So you need to make it smaller, and with that it's easier to connect it. And that is, I think, as a general direction, I think very important to keep in mind. Decentralizing it and make it more connected by energy, food, and stuff. And then you can serve communities also in a better way.
I think that connecting people back to the food that they're eating is really important, because the messages aren't that simple. And I think that's a place where some of the indoor growers are doing a fantastic job. Like, because you are connecting people locally to your production systems. So that's a place where I think we can all kind of learn from. And how do we talk to people more about their food so they understand where the food is coming from, how it's produced, and how they can make healthy and tasty food choices.
Absolutely. One of my peers was on a panel a few hours ago about green cities and connecting exactly what you're saying, bringing us back to that connection of the food. And a lot of people these days take for granted where their food comes from. And especially in the US, it's coming from California, Mexico, outside of the country, where it shows up on the store shelf and we buy it and we don't think about it. But 80Acres and other industry players were able to bring that farm local. People are employed by the farm, they're connecting to the farm. When I started working for the company, it was really exciting, the number of people who were very enthusiastic about my company and my job and wanted to tell me how much they enjoy our food and how it tastes better and how it lasts longer. And people are really starting to ask those questions about where is my food coming from and how come your food lasts longer in my refrigerator than the other option on the shelf. So I think we're starting to have some of that reconnection, and we find that food's really emotional, and it's been a fun journey to be a part of a company that's really making changes in our city.
And do you think that we're sharing enough data? I mean, I know you and I are probably converts, Annie, but for the rest of you, are we talking enough in the industry? Are we sharing enough data? And is it comparable data, or are we all talking in a different language?
Probably one for you, isn't it?
So I work with a lot of growers, and I must admit we often ask about how they're measuring sustainability, how they're measuring their inputs is what we talk about. And wow, I get a lot of different answers, and so for me it is really hard to compare. I do think that it's every grower I talk to, and many consumers, well, every grower I talk to is interested in the topic. They are trying to have a positive impact on their communities, on the environment in which they operate. They're trying to grow good, healthy food. There's no exceptions. So, but they all make different decisions, and a lot of it depends on the ecosystem where they live, the cost of energy, or their production method. So I'm finding it tough to compare, I must admit. I would really welcome more kind of common benchmarking standards.
I think that's it. If there's standards and a framework to share that information, it makes it easy. We've got to remember people are running huge operational facilities, and it's pretty hard to take some time out of your day job to go and measure the water emissions, for example. I think it's something that's developing across the whole economy. It's not just glasshouse, it's not just vertical farming, but if there is a common framework that works, then at least we can work to that. And I think in general, it's kind of, I think in doing that, people will start to see the benefits, because as you say, it highlights opportunities that perhaps, unless you try it, you won't realise that isn't actually a really good way of auditing your business practice, not just from an operational standpoint, as well as from an environmental standpoint as well.
And do you have a sense of what other aeroponic farmers are doing, Jack, in terms of...
I'd say, I think to be quite honest, I think it's a lot of technology providers. Because generally performance is quite situational, particularly if you're in a glasshouse. So the water consumption in Dubai is going to be very different to it is here. So it's about, if we're looking at direct technology comparison, often it's about actually collaborating and co-locating in these kind of research facilities, or establishing kind of trials or I guess common standards for the facilities that you're building to kind of get that comparative data. And that it's a really interesting challenge, because we've actually had to classify our data when we're benchmarking into two tiers. We have relative data, where we put something right next to each other, and we have like a kind of, we call it comparative, where we just basically take a technology company's best yields, and we say, well, these are our best yields, but then there's so much nuance behind that whole thing. So it's quite a tricky one, but I think to get properly good data, you kind of do need almost a show home with these different technologies in it to run those direct comparison trials. Yeah.
If I may add, you ask if we share enough data. So I think first question, do we have the data, and is this data similar so that it's comparable? And the answer is more or less no, and no. It's not there, it's not comparable, it's difficult to share. But if I generally see the greenhouse space, the growers come together, talk, share information. If I see vertical farming, I would say no, because it feels like that the vertical farming players see technology core to their business and as a secret source, and so is data, and that's why they are not very often don't see themselves as farmers to produce food, but as technology companies. And then this is core to their business, and they don't share. A greenhouse grower would never say, I'm a technology company. They're growers. Very different how they see themselves and what they think is their product they're selling. And if I see the greenhouse, in the greenhouse space, they see the problems. Every grower, they see, oh man, all the rock wool blocks, or all this pots, or I got my seedlings and there's all the plastic wrap around it, or the FLUENCE lights came in this and that packaging, what do I do with this stuff? Whatever it is. And then they think, okay, this pile of shit, I need to find a solution. And they tackle problem after problem, change packaging, try to reuse stuff, and so on. But they're in a running system where they need to go for each and everything and to change it over time. I want to just two different worlds for me. I'm serving both, and I see very different behavior of how open we can be with data and connecting growers with each other. In greenhouse, very easy. In vertical farming, very difficult.
I think it's quite interesting. It's an interesting comment on vertical farming, because a bit like you, I've probably grown up in that industry, well, at least in my professional career. And I think a lot of it is driven by the investment cycles that a lot of these companies go through. You fundamentally couldn't raise that amount of money as a grower. It's a sad truth about finance, is that they want intellectual property. But what I think is going to be really interesting is, effectively, I'm sure these investors have realised at some point that they are basically just project financing farms now, and this is it's a very different proposition to the one that maybe people signed up to. It's not really a tech company, it's a farming company. So that conversation will have to evolve as those investors get comfortable with it, whether it's when they go public, as companies go public, or whether it's when those companies become profitable and just build farms. I think it will be a case of maturing, and you'll see more of the vertical farmers actually, and growers in this case, I think, actually becoming more part of this kind of event. You don't see too many vertical farming companies here because they see themselves as slightly other, whereas actually they are very much growers aligned with the greenhouse industry. And I think that maturation of that industry, as the finance taps start to get turned off a little bit, and it is profitable, I think will lead to more growers' conventions, more publicly available information. It's just a growing pains in my view.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I mean, the vertical farming industry is still in startup phase, isn't it? So that is going to make a difference. But Timo, you brought up a really good point about waste and packaging. Does anybody on the panel see any interesting solutions or potential solutions to the packaging issues?
So we're constantly looking to improve, and packaging has been something we're looking at. Some of our team this week while we were here, we're looking at different solutions. So we're aware this is an opportunity. We talked about end of life. That's very important. So that's something that we have found using the greenhouse gas protocol methodology to look at our greenhouse gas inventory that we identified as an area of opportunity, and we're investigating, and we're also collaborating locally and understanding what our consumers can recycle. And their curbside bin in the U.S., it's a little different than other countries, but we're looking to improve that absolutely.
And do you think the U.S. is leading in that area?
In recycling on the curbside bin, from what I've seen in the world, no. Other countries, there's a lot difference. Differences where I'm from, neighboring states, it's not required. It's not required to recycle, so it's a consumer choice. So I have a recycling bill at my house, and there's no penalty for putting the wrong things in the bin or vice versa. So I think there's maybe some maturity that other countries have that the U.S. doesn't quite have yet, and I hope to see personally, but we're just not there yet.
So what would any of you think would be the number one thing that an indoor farm could do to increase, in general, to increase its sustainability credentials, or perhaps to qualify its sustainability credentials? Is it life cycle analysis for products, or where have we got to go to be able to say, as an industry, we're trying to get to sustainable measures?
I think for me, it's data-driven claims and benchmarking.
Every case is different, so I just want to give you a grower in Poland, get the energy from the grid. Poland produces most of the energy with coal. Then I would, as this grower, start changing my where I get my energy, because heating up coal to get energy and then lit up my crop makes 0 sense. So that is a huge impact. So in this particular case, I would start there. If I have a lot of waste material in my packaging, I would start there. So I think, what is the biggest bang for sustainability? Start there, because then something is rolling, because then also in the companies it becomes a behavioral change. The people think about it all the time and so on, but you need to have a success story, a good first big bang, then you can bring your whole company aligned on this target of sustainability, and whatever they do, if they purchase a pen, they think about it and so on, but there must be some success, because then everyone is hungry to do more in sustainability, which would be great.
Oh, that's pretty, good idea. I think You mentioned life cycle assessment, and I think that is actually quite a good initial step. But I think the practical implications of that are actually mapping your inputs and outputs and understanding how that affects your local system. I obviously agree with energy. People need the resilience and the renewable source. But across the board, if you know your inputs and outputs, you can actually start to extrapolate your impact on the wider food system. Because we all talk about wanting to change the food system, but if we're always focusing internally on our own performance, you might not actually be actively trying to innovate and trying to change things within the kind of retail supply chain, for example. So inputs, outputs, and then being trying to be an active kind of force for adjusting your local and regional food systems into a more decentralized and resilient model. And that's probably the way I'd go.
Yeah, I think I'm building on what all of you have said. We use the B Corp certification process as a way to kind of embed the kind of values around sustainability in our company, and it's a very easy to follow protocol, and it encourages you to do things like life cycle analysis and a lot of measurement. So then you have a pretty clear idea what the key targets for you as an operation are. So I think if that's a great example of an easy to follow structure that's been super valuable for us. So I think finding some processes to help embed sustainable thinking or thinking about sustainability in the organization really helps.
Sadly, I see the clock has ticked down very quickly. I'd like to just end by thanking everybody on the panel for an excellent conversation around sustainability and for encouraging people to really grab hold of that and giving practical advice of how they can do it. On behalf of FarmtechSociety, thank you everybody for coming.